Hi, welcome to my new series. I don't really know what to call it yet, but I'll consider this the sequel to the first one that I did that you can find here, called I Love Letterboxd, because I just like sharing with you what I do love. So, today I'm going to talk about podcasts. I was watching podcasts or forms of podcasts in my teen years. I'm going to share with you the first one that I ever got into. And it was a podcast in the form of a talk show. It was called Inside the Actor's Studio. And it was kind of like a podcast, I think like mostly in the 90s, early 2000s maybe, hosted by James Lipton. He would have A-list celebrities on. Some of the most iconic episodes are ones with Robin Williams, Jerry Lewis, Robert De Niro. Bradley Cooper is actually seen in the audience, because Inside the Actor's Studio was a school. They were the live audience. James Lipton really did his research. He had incredible questions. And it was a very great behind-the-scenes look at some iconic films and characters. It's hard to find now. It's probably behind a paywall somewhere. You can probably buy it. It used to be free on YouTube back in the day, but not anymore. So the first actual podcast that I ever got into is still all over YouTube, I believe, but it's Kevin Pollak's Chat Show. Kevin Pollak really intrigues me, especially as a podcast host, but also as an actor. He was never trained as an actor, but he knows the mark to hit, just intuitively. And that intuition can be seen when he hosts his podcast with guests like Christopher Guest, Tom Hanks. The list goes on and on. He had this show for years. They eventually turned it from video into audio, and then they ended it for some reason. But Kevin Pollak had some of the best interview questions I have ever heard in my life. I wish more people had an approach like him. So that leads me into another podcast that I really got into. It's Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. It's very informative through the guests and their professional thing. Whatever they specialize in, whatever they've been educated in, they know what they're talking about. So it's less research-based and more free-flow. Joe Rogan comes up with his questions. He doesn't have them prepped like Kevin Pollak or James Lipton. Joe Rogan took a book out of Howard Stern's page. Yeah. Joe Rogan took a page out of Howard Stern's book. In the Joe Rogan Experience, they handle topics that are often hard to understand, hard to discuss. It's never really one-sided. Joe Rogan knows how to mediate and stay the cough. Along with its information, it also has a lot of comedy, with its various comics who are honored to be on the Joe Rogan Experience for the massive audience that he has. So you get a lot of really good stories. People are on their A-game when they're on Joe Rogan, or they should be. Okay, so another podcast that I just got into, because really it just started this past summer. It's hosted by two twin brothers, James and Anthony, and it's called Raiders of the Lost Podcast. It's extremely well researched, and it's delivered very smoothly. The podcast episodes are around 90 minutes to 2 hours, and it's fairly recent, like I said, with a very hopeful future. It has a great mix of mainstream media, as well as independently financed art house films, maybe even low budget. But if it's good in the craft, they review it. They post twice a week, and they're on every other social media platform that you can think of. OnlyFans? No. They have lots to offer on Patreon or in other sponsorships and discounts. But those two are clearly cinephiles and very educated in film history, even. So this one is a two-parter, because it's co-hosted by the same guy. Filmed at his house, on his couch. But Sal Vulcano from The Impractical Jokers? Yeah. He has two podcasts, Taste Buds and Hey Babe. Both of his co-hosts are New York comics. There's a lot of playful banter. So the Taste Buds podcast that he has to do with two different types of food being argued to see who's the winner. They post polls on Twitter. People vote on them. So it's a popularity contest with the food. Don't watch it on an empty stomach. Or do. And then Sal also has another one called Hey Babe with Chris DiStefano. And those two kind of just talk. They'll pose hypothetical questions. They'll tell crazy stories that one of them hasn't heard or, the audience hasn't heard. Another one kind of in the same vein is Bad Friends, hosted by Bobby Lee and Andrew Santino. Those two clearly go back a long time. They're hilarious. They'll enter into improvised situations. And then they'll just have some witty banter based off of characters they just made up. So it's fun. Those are usually 90 minutes to 105. They have really fun guest and fan interactions. They'll just read emails or even have guests on their podcast. Another great one. If you're familiar with Jackass at all, you'll know this guy, Steve-O, and how crazy he is. He has been in some of the craziest, life-threatening, harmful situations and come out of there unscathed or scathed, and he doesn't really care. He has this podcast called Steve-O's Wild Ride. Yeah, dude. Sorry, his catchphrase, not mine. He has some really popular celebrities on there. Actors, musicians, skaters, wrestlers, I think. Yeah. And they're shorter episodes, which is kind of nice. It's not as long of a commitment. He has one with Shaq that's like 30 minutes. He has one with Kevin Hart that's like 4 hours. I'm just kidding. Although that would make sense. Great podcast, though. They got some crazy stories being shown and told on there through footage and vocal cords. Two Bears, One Cave. Not a porn, it's a podcast. Starring Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer. They have some of the funniest conversations, speculations, personal stories that should not be told or revealed publicly, but they have no shame. There is no shame in this podcast. And there's some extreme video content that's shown, too, that is hard to watch. Like Tom Segura breaking half his body playing basketball, trying to dunk. What was he thinking? Another podcast that I like is Smartless. It's an audio podcast, but you can find it on Apple Podcast or any other audio streaming service. Starring Will Arnett, Jason Bateman, and Sean Hayes. They have A-list celebrities, let me tell you, and some phenomenal behind-the-scenes stories about the entertainment industry. And some really funny banter. No, seriously. This is important. Another audio podcast. It has 4 hosts. You know who they are? They're the freaking workaholics, dude. Get your stuff right. Hilarious banter, stories, fictional situations, and they clearly have a long past that shows on the podcast. On the podpast. Man, I had to try really hard to laugh at that one. Hopefully it came easier to you. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Kleins. Ethan and Neela Klein. They host a podcast as a couple, and they have a great team of capable people behind them doing research. You can really feel that it's like a family. They have a very communal sense of humor, and kind of a dark sense of humor, but that's my taste as well, to an extent. They're described as a drama channel, so they definitely keep you updated with hot topics, trends, and especially YouTube drama. Ethan co-hosts another podcast called Frenemies with Trisha Paytas, and that one is a lot more intense, even vulgar. There's tons more drama. But it's entertaining, and it's insightful. Yeah, I just learned something new every podcast. And least but not last, Armchair Expert, hosted by Dax Shepard. And some other chick. That's not his wife, actually. It's his therapist, actually. And they have really deep and meaningful conversations with their guests, who are also A-list celebrities. Ashton Kutcher, and others. Kristen Bell, Natalie Portman, people like that. But they have conversations about addiction, anger, loneliness, financial hardships, and the industry of entertainment. That's kind of their focus. And there is some comedy, but that's not, well, their focus. So yeah, I hope I'm not forgetting anything. If I do, maybe I'll make a sequel to this one. But I think I like this series called I Love. That's what I'm going to call it. So there's going to be a playlist, there's going to be more of these, and I'd kind of like it to be a podcast of my own. I'm also going to be coming out with my story really soon. I'm writing it now, dividing it up into chapters. I'm going to translate it into Portuguese and share the entirety of my story in detail with you guys. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for being here and watching this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Love you guys. Peace.